There are moments that define who we are. For me, that moment happened at 35,000 feet in the air, when a millionaire decided that I didn't deserve to be in first class. What he didn't know was that, on that day, our destinies were already connected by a past that he was desperately trying to forget. My name is Mariana Rodriguez. I'm a teacher at an immigrant school in Toronto, and this is the story of how 3 hours on a plane not only saved my school, but before subscribing to the channel, my hands trembled slightly as I handed my boarding pass to the flight attendant. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly when she saw "First Class" printed on the ticket. "First time in first class, ma'am?" she asked with a practiced smile. I nodded, feeling heat creep up my neck. "That obvious, huh?" "Not at all," she lied kindly. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Rodriguez." As I walked down the jet bridge toward the plane, I couldn't help but touch the small golden pin on my lapel, the Ontario Excellence in Education Award. My students had insisted I wear it today. "Show them all how amazing you are, Ms. R," Aisha had said yesterday during our goodbye celebration. The memory gave me courage as I stepped onto the aircraft. I'd been teaching at Maple Creek Community School in Mississauga for 8 years. It wasn't the fanciest school. Our building was old, our resources limited, but what we lacked in funding we made up for in heart. My classroom was a beautiful tapestry of cultures, kids whose parents had come from all corners of the globe seeking a better life in Canada. I saw myself in them, the daughter of Colombian immigrants who had sacrificed everything so I could have opportunities they never did. When the school board nominated me for the National Teaching Award, I almost fell out of my chair. When I actually won, earning both recognition and this round-trip ticket to Vancouver for the award ceremony, my students threw confetti made from recycled paper in our classroom. The first-class cabin was intimidatingly elegant. Soft lighting, wide leather seats, flight attendants moving with graceful efficiency. I found my seat, 3A window, and fumbled with my worn duffel bag, trying to find a place for it in the spacious overhead compartment. "Are you sure you're in the right section?" The voice came from beside me, deep and accented with what I recognized as Brazilian Portuguese, but polished by years of North American education. I turned to face a man in his early 40s, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. His dark hair was styled perfectly, and he wore an expression of amused skepticism. "Yes," I answered, finally managing to stow my bag. 3A window seat." He raised an eyebrow, looking me up and down, taking in my sensible shoes, department store dress, and the small golden pin I was suddenly embarrassed to be wearing. "Interesting," he said, not bothering to hide his smirk as he settled into 3B beside me. "Business or pleasure trip?" "I'm going to Vancouver for an awards ceremony," I said, immediately wondering why I felt compelled to explain myself to this stranger. He gave a small dismissive nod and turned his attention to his phone, already losing interest in me. The diamond cufflinks on his wrist caught the light as he scrolled through emails. More passengers filed into first class, all exuding the confident air of people who belonged in this exclusive space. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. Belonged here too. I'd earned this seat just as much as any of them. The flight attendant approached with a tray of champagne flutes. "Champagne before takeoff," she offered. I hesitated. I rarely drank, and certainly not at 11 a.m. on a Thursday. But something about the man's dismissive glance pushed me to reach for a glass. "Careful," he murmured, just loud enough for me to hear as the attendant moved on. "That's real Dom Perignon, not the boxed wine I'm guessing you're used to." My cheeks burned. I set the untouched champagne on my tray table, suddenly feeling every inch the imposter he clearly thought I was. "Bruno Ferreira," he introduced himself, offering a manicured hand after apparently deciding I might be worth acknowledging after all. "Ferreira Development Group." "Mariana Rodriguez," I replied, shaking his hand briefly. "Maple Creek Community School." His eyebrows rose. "A teacher, in first class. Did you win the lottery?" He chuckled at his own joke. "Something like that," I answered quietly, turning toward the window. I should have put on headphones or pretended to sleep. Instead, I watched Toronto's skyline grow smaller beneath us as we took off, wondering how a 3-hour flight could possibly feel so long. But I had no idea that this flight would change everything. Not just for me, but for Bruno Ferreira, my school, and an entire community fighting to preserve its place in a rapidly changing city. And it all started when he laughed at me for not knowing how to recline my seat. "Is there something wrong with this seat?" I asked, pressing every button on the armrest unsuccessfully. The leather chair, which probably cost more than my monthly rent, refused to recline. Bruno's laugh was sharp and immediate. "You really don't belong here, do you?" He reached over, his expensive cologne invading my space, and pressed a combination of buttons I hadn't tried. My seat smoothly reclined, and his smirk widened. "Thank you," I said stiffly, mortified as I noticed a businessman across the aisle watching our interaction with barely concealed amusement. "First time out of economy?" Bruno asked loudly, clearly enjoying himself. "Don't worry, I'm sure whoever paid for your ticket won't regret their charity." I wanted to disappear. Or better yet, explain that I'd earned this seat through years of dedication to my students, often working 60-hour weeks for modest pay because I believed in what I was doing. Instead, I simply opened the complimentary tablet provided by the airline and pretended to be absorbed in the movie selection. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude," the captain announced over the intercom. "Flight attendants will begin meal service shortly." Bruno was immediately handed a glass of scotch by an attentive flight attendant who seemed to recognize him. "The usual Mr. Ferreira," she said with a familiarity that suggested he flew this route often. "Business in Vancouver again?" she asked pleasantly. "Finalizing a major development deal," he replied. "Should be announcing it publicly next week after the final signatures." "Congratulations. That's wonderful news." Their easy conversation made me feel even more out of place. I turned back to my tablet but couldn't focus on selecting a movie. Instead, I discreetly observed Bruno as he pulled out a sleek laptop and opened what appeared to be architectural renderings. I wasn't trying to snoop, but when he tilted the screen to take a call on his wireless earbuds, I caught a glimpse of something that made my heart stop. It was a familiar street corner. Too familiar. "Yes, Richard, the Mississauga project is proceeding exactly as planned," Bruno was saying, his voice low but not low enough. "The neighborhood council meeting is just a formality. We already have the votes we need on the city planning commission." I tried not to stare at his screen, but my eyes were drawn to the rendering of a luxurious glass and steel condominium tower. And below it, the address I knew by heart. 1420 Elmwood Drive. Maple Creek Community School. My school. My classroom. My students' safe haven. The old school building. Bruno continued. "Scheduled for demolition 60 days after closing. We're billing it as urban renewal. These immigrant neighborhoods eventually all gentrify anyway." My blood turned cold. I'd heard rumors about development threats, but our principal had assured us nothing was imminent. Yet here was this man, casually discussing bulldozing the heart of our community while sipping scotch at 30,000 feet. I thought about Aisha, whose mother walked her to school every day before catching 2 buses to her cleaning job. About Miguel, who'd finally stopped hiding under his desk during loud noises, feeling safe for the first time since fleeing violence in El Salvador. About the community garden we'd planted last spring, where parents who couldn't afford fresh produce could harvest vegetables with their children. All of it reduced to urban renewal, in Bruno's dismissive tone. "The property values are already rising in anticipation," he continued, scrolling through slides. "We're projecting 40% returns for our investors within 3 years." I must have made a noise, because Bruno suddenly looked up, catching me watching his screen. His easy smile vanished. "Can I help you with something?" he asked coldly, tilting his laptop away. That's Maple Creek Community School," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. He frowned, annoyed at the interruption. "You know it. I teach there," I said. "Those immigrant neighborhoods you mentioned. That's my community." For a brief moment, something flickered across his face. Discomfort, perhaps, before his expression hardened again. "It's nothing personal," he said, closing his laptop. "It's business. That building is ancient, the neighborhood is changing. It's inevitable. There are 300 children in that school," I replied, my voice strengthening despite the tremor I felt inside. "Where will they go?" He shrugged. "There are other schools. The district will reassign them. The nearest school is 3 miles away, across a major highway. Many of our families don't have cars. Like I said, not my problem." He signaled to the flight attendant. "I'll have another scotch, please." As he was handed his drink, I noticed something I hadn't before. A small Brazilian flag pin on his lapel, partially hidden by his suit jacket. Suddenly, I remembered something from our school's community history project. "You're from Vila Esperança originally, aren't you?" I asked quietly. Bruno froze, his glass halfway to his lips. His eyes, suddenly sharp, locked onto mine. "How could you possibly know that?" he demanded. "We did a neighborhood history project last year. Many of the Brazilian families in our district came from Vila Esperança in the 1990s. I paused, watching his face. "Your name was on one of the original community support rosters. Your family received settlement assistance at Maple Creek when you first arrived in Canada." The glass in his hand trembled slightly before he set it down, his knuckles white against the crystal. "That was a lifetime ago," he said coldly. "I was a child. My family moved away from that neighborhood as soon as we could afford to." "But you started there," I pressed. "In the very building you're planning to demolish." For a moment, something like shame crossed his features, quickly replaced by practiced indifference. "Progress requires change, Ms. Rodriguez," he said, emphasizing my name with subtle mockery. "Sentimentality is a luxury for those who can afford it." The flight attendant appeared with our lunch menus, interrupting the tension between us. But as I pretended to study the offerings, my mind was racing. This man who had laughed at me, who had made me feel small and insignificant in this first-class cabin, was about to destroy everything my students and their families depended on. And he didn't care. Or maybe he did care, but had buried that part of himself so deeply that even he couldn't find it anymore. Either way, I had 3 hours left on this flight. 3 hours to figure out how to stop him. I just had no idea how. The lunch service arrived. Elegant plates that made economy-class sandwiches look like prison food. I barely tasted mine, picking absently at herb-crusted salmon while my mind raced. Bruno had returned to his work, occasionally taking calls in hushed Portuguese, deliberately turning away from me. 2 rows ahead, I noticed a woman in a tailored blazer glance back at us repeatedly. Her press badge partially visible on the lanyard she'd set aside read, "Vancouver Sunday." Beside her sat an older gentleman whose kind face seemed vaguely familiar, though I couldn't place him. My phone buzzed with a text from Gabriella, our school's community liaison. "How's first class, superstar? Kids made you a welcome back banner." She'd attached a photo of my students holding a colorful sign. "We heartsuit Ms. Rodriguez." I zoomed in on their faces. Aisha, Miguel, Tao, Destiny. Children whose families had crossed oceans and borders for the promise of this community. Something crystallized within me. I couldn't just sit here paralyzed by intimidation. Not anymore. I clicked on my browser and searched Bruno Ferreira Development. Pages of results appeared. Profiles in business magazines, photos at charity galas, a feature about Canadian immigrant success stories. The irony wasn't lost on me. I kept scrolling until I found what I needed. A video of him receiving a community leadership award last year. "I believe in transforming communities," he said in the clip. His media-trained smile perfect. "My developments aren't just about profit. They're about creating spaces where people can thrive." I watched it twice more, pulse quickening. Then I did something I never would have imagined when I boarded this plane. I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood up. "Excuse me," I said, not to Bruno, but loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "May I have everyone's attention for a moment?" The murmur of conversations paused. Bruno looked up, confusion turning to alarm as he realized what was happening. My name is Mariana Rodriguez. I'm a teacher at Maple Creek Community School in Mississauga. My voice shook slightly, but I pressed on. I apologize for the interruption, but I've just discovered something that I believe everyone here should know about. Bruno grabbed my arm, hissing, "Sit down. You're embarrassing yourself." I gently but firmly removed his hand. "No, Mr. Ferreira. For the first time today, I'm not embarrassed at all." The flight attendant approached with concern. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" "Everything is not all right," I replied. "And I think your first-class passengers might be interested in what's happening to a community of 300 immigrant children." Bruno's face darkened. "This is completely inappropriate. I'll have you removed." "From what?" "The plane. We're at 35,000 feet, Mr. Ferreira." I turned back to the cabin. This gentleman sitting next to me is Bruno Ferreira. His development company is planning to demolish a school that serves immigrant families in Mississauga to build luxury condos. The woman with the press badge was now fully turned around, her eyes sharp with interest. "Miss, please return to your seat," the flight attendant insisted. "In just a moment," I promised. "Mr. Ferreira has spent the past hour making me feel like I don't belong in first class. Like a teacher couldn't possibly deserve to be here among the successful people." Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. "But what you all should know," I continued, heart pounding, "is that Mr. Ferreira himself was once a student at the very school he plans to demolish. His family came from Brazil with nothing. That immigrant community welcomed him, supported his family, gave him his start in Canada." I turned to face Bruno directly. "You were in Mrs. Abramson's class, weren't you? 5th grade, 1992. Your essay about your first winter in Canada won the district writing contest." His face had drained of color. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because Mrs. Abramson still teaches at our school. She kept your essay, Bruno. It's framed in our front hall as inspiration. My New Home, by Bruno Ferreira. You wrote about how scared you were arriving in Canada not speaking English, and how the kids and teachers at Maple Creek made you feel like you belonged." The silence in the cabin was absolute now. "That's enough," Bruno said, but his voice had lost its commanding edge. The older gentleman 2 rows ahead stood up slowly. "Excuse me. I'm Richard Chen, Urban Development Commissioner for the Greater Toronto Area." My breath caught. That's why he looked familiar. I'd seen him in news coverage of city planning meetings. "Mr. Ferreira and I were scheduled to meet tomorrow about the Maple Creek project." He looked at Bruno with new scrutiny. "I wasn't aware of your personal connection to the property, Mr. Ferreira. That seems like a significant omission." The journalist was openly taking notes now. Bruno stood, straightening his jacket. "This is a private business matter that's being mischaracterized by someone who doesn't understand urban development economics." I held my ground. "I understand that 300 children, most from families who can't afford cars, will have to cross Highway 27 to reach the next nearest school. I understand that our community garden feeds 50 families. I understand that our adult ESL program helps parents learn English in the evenings so they can find better jobs." I paused, looking him directly in the eyes. "And I understand that you were once one of those children, Bruno." Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the perfect facade. "May I?" Richard Chen gestured to the empty seat beside Bruno. Bruno nodded stiffly. For the next 30 minutes, as the other passengers pretended not to eavesdrop, the 3 of us talked. I showed them photos of our students, explained our after-school programs, and outlined what losing the school would mean for the community. Richard asked pointed questions about alternative sites for Bruno's development. Bruno, to my surprise, began to engage seriously. The profit margins would be tighter, he admitted, but the Parker Street location could work. By the time we began our descent into Vancouver, something extraordinary had happened. Bruno pulled out his business card and handed it to me. "I'd like to visit the school," he said quietly. before any final decisions are made. I'd like that, I replied, hardly believing the words coming out of my mouth. As we deplaned, the journalist approached me. Jessica Kim, Vancouver Sunday. I'd love to talk more about your school and this development situation. Ms. Rodriguez, Richard Chen added. I believe we need community voices like yours on our Urban Planning Advisory Committee. Would you be interested? I nodded, stunned, as he handed me his card. Bruno lingered at the gate, uncharacteristically hesitant. I was ashamed, he finally said, of where I came from. I worked so hard to erase that part of my life. You shouldn't be, I told him. Your journey is exactly what makes your story powerful. His usual confidence was tempered now, replaced by something more authentic. My mother used to walk me to Maple Creek every morning before her cleaning shift. I had forgotten that until today. Come see it again, I said. Meet our students. Then decide. 2 weeks later, Bruno Ferreira walked into my classroom at Maple Creek Community School. My students watched curiously as this man in an expensive suit knelt down to examine their science projects. He stopped at the community history display, staring at his own childhood essay beneath the glass. Ms. R, is he famous? Aisha whispered loudly. He's someone who used to go to our school, I explained. He's remembering what that was like. 3 months later, Ferreira Development announced a new project, a community center and affordable housing complex adjacent to a fully renovated Maple Creek Community School. The press release mentioned a substantial donation to fund updated facilities and expanded programs. At the groundbreaking ceremony, Bruno stood at the podium and told the real story. How a teacher in first class had reminded him where he came from, and in doing so, had shown him where he needed to go. As for me, I still fly economy most of the time. But last month, when I traveled to Ottawa to speak before the National Education Council with Bruno about our new community development model, he insisted on upgrading my ticket. This time, when I walked into first class, I knew exactly how to recline my seat. And I belonged there every bit as much as anyone else.